Hey everyone, I'm Chelsea from the Build Book support team, and today we're going to go over a little bit about our financials, but specifically bills and expenses in the financials. So, to start off with, you can add bills and expenses to your project in two different ways. You can either add it from the projects via the financials and then the bills and expenses tab right here, or you can click on the More menu, click on bills and expenses here, and that's going to show you your global bills and expenses. For right now, we're going to work out of the project, and then I'll show you a little bit of the differences that the global bills and expenses have. But to start with, I wanted to go over how bills and expenses are shown in the budget. So right off the bat in the budget summary, you are going to see bills and expenses, and what they'll end up showing up like is a cost. So bills and expenses in Build Book are a way for you to pay bills or invoices that are sent to you. Including things like if you had to go out and grab some material for a project, that is included in those expenses. So bills and expenses are money going out on the project, while invoices are money coming into the project. So the way you see bills and expenses in your budget, specifically the summary and the budget tab, is as a cost. And that's again because this is technically subtracting from the profit of your project. Now, one of the things that BuildBook does not have built into it currently is a job actuals or profit over loss. So while you can track your bills and expenses via this cost column right here, it's actually not designed to automate or do anything with the price column right here. Essentially, what this cost column does is it allows you to track those bills and expenses so you can see the cost on the project and subtract that from the overall price right here. But at the end of the day, it's not designed to do that for you, and it's not going to show you anything like that. Within the budget, you'll notice that the bills and expenses also show up here under the cost. And we have these little tool tips here for you just in case you want to know what goes into each particular column here. So this is just the total of the expenses and bills associated to this particular budget line item. So when you have something that you've associated to a budget line item, it'll show up here in the bills and expenses. Now, if you do add bills and expenses, but maybe you're not adding them to line item, essentially they're just kind of like an overhead fee, then you can actually add a bill and expense to an unassociated cost. So you don't have to add anything to your item necessarily or to your selections. If you wanted to just track the costs for this particular project, but it doesn't really go to anything, you can always leave it unassociated. And then if you click here on your unassociated, it'll open up your bills and expenses tab where you can go through and see which bills are unassociated. As you can see, I have multiple bills right now in here that are completely unassociated. And I can also really quickly and easily tell that because there's nothing here in the associated column. So if there was something associated like a line item for this particular bill, I could add that here. I could also keep the other cost unassociated. And then what you'll see is that there is an associated line item here now, whereas the other one doesn't have anything associated with it because it's not associated to any line items. Within your bills and expenses tab, you're going to be able to create your bill or expense. So you just click on add item, add bill or an expense. Now, when you do this, the first thing that you're going to need to have is a vendor or payee. So you can actually add a vendor or payee directly from the bill or expense just by typing in their name, essentially. Oops. And then right here, you'll notice that there's a little blue create. You can either click that or just hit enter. And now when you choose this drop down, you'll notice that Bing Plumbing and Mechanical is at the very bottom. Now, if I exit out of this and I go back to add in my bill, again, we'll see that Bing Plumbing is already added. So I don't have to go to the vendors tab in the more menu to add in any vendors here. I can literally simply just create them within the bill or expense. And then if I want to, I can then go through to the vendors tab to add more information such as their point of contact, email addresses, add normal addresses like mailing addresses and stuff like that. I can add that all through the more tab in the vendors For this in particular, it's just going to be basically assigning a vendor to this bill. Now, you do have to have vendors or pays assigned to the bill. So even if you're going to be using a subcontractor, we still ask that you put them in as a vendor as well, just because that's how they're going to be tracked in the system. So they'll be in people and vendors as well. Each bill will need a due date. So this is the due date on the actual invoice that is sent to from the company. So for example, Bing Plumbing may have sent me a invoice with a due date of the 23rd. So depending on whatever their their particular uh net terms are, it could be due on receipt, it could be 15 days, it could be 30 days, whatever that is, I'm just going to put it in here as my due date. I'll have some additional options as well. I can put in the bill date. So what was the date that I received the bill? You can also put in the date that the bill was created, but I personally like to track this as the date that I received the bill, because if I received it on the 22nd and it's asking me to pay it on the 23rd, at least I can say I received this bill on the 22nd. Every bill will have a status, so either unpaid or paid. That status actually doesn't have anything to do with how these are um, tracked on the budget. So essentially, this is just a really nice, easy way for you to go back through your bills and expenses to see what you still have left to pay. You can add in an optional bill number here if you wanted to, your description and attachment. Although you don't have to add in a description or attachment, if you do ever plan on sharing bills or expenses with your clients, or even just to help you keep track of what's going on with in between your projects and things like that, we do strongly suggest adding in a little description about what this is for and attaching the original invoice here. And again, this is just going to allow you to really quickly jump into a bill or expense, and you can check out the description. Oh, I totally forgot this was for plumbing labor for this amount of time. And here's the invoice that I can reference back to. Down here, you'll have an add budget line item. So this is where you can assign bills and expenses to particular line items in the project. This is going to show you every single line item that you have in your project currently. So if you don't see a line item or you're searching here and you don't see anything, it's because it hasn't been added to that project yet. And you'll want to back out and go back in and add it as a line item to your budget before you can use it in here. Now, once you've added your item, you can associate a cost to it. So maybe this is for, a dumpster or something like that provided by Bing Plumbing and Mechanical for their particular mess on the job site or things like that. In that case, I can add it to the dumpster, I can add my cost, and then I can save, or if I'm doing multiple bills at the same time, I can just click on save and add another. Additionally, like I said, this unassociated cost right here, that's more for like your overhead costs, maybe not something that you're necessarily charging to the client, but is included in that management fee. And you just want to track that cost. You can always add things to the unassociated costs here. I personally like to add things in the unassociated cost and then add in the description why it's unassociated. So again, I can very quickly and easily see what I did with this particular bill or expense or why it's kind of looking the way it is. So as you'll notice, you have two different objects in here. You're going to have a bill or an expense. The biggest difference between the two is that a bill is an invoice that is sent to you by your vendor that needs to be paid. It can either be paid or unpaid. And in the project, you have a way to track that via the status. What you'll notice here, though, is that the status is non-existent for expenses. And that's because expenses are more like I had to run to Home Depot to get a gasket for some plumbing. I had to run over to the hardware store to get some more paint for something. I've used my company credit card or cash or check or whatever it is. I paid for that product already. And so in that case, I don't have to add in any type of paid or unpaid status here because expenses are already automatically paid. These are things that you have gotten in hand that you're taking back with you to the project, whereas bills are things that you have on the project that you're currently being billed for. So again, this could be like labor, this could be like your recurring payment for your dumpster, anything like that. And expenses are going to be things that you've had to go pick up or you have in hand right away. Now, When you click on add item, you'll also be able to add an expense. And the biggest difference between the bills and expenses is for the expenses, you won't have a status, of course, and then you won't have necessarily a due date. You'll just have a date right here. So again, you can find the vendor or payee from anywhere that you want to in here. We'll choose Home Depot again. You can then add the date of your expense. So this is the date that you went and picked up this particular piece of material or whatever the expense was for. You can add in your attachment, so like your receipt from Home Depot, your description again, which is totally optional, but again, it just keeps me on track. I like to know why I had to run to Home Depot for that particular item. I can then assign it to the budget item, just like the bills. So I can choose whatever budget item I want to. I can even choose to search in here, so I can apply it to paint colors. Now, as far as bills and expenses with selections, you are able to add them to selections, but let's say that there is no selection item within the bills and expenses. So selections are two different, they're made up of two different components, the selection category and then the items within that category. If there are no items within that category, what you'll see from the bills and expenses is that once you add this or create this particular expense for that item and you save it, you'll see it obviously pull up here, but then in your selections, if you go to your painting, you'll notice that there is a new item in here called expense. And it just basically says that this is an expense for Home Depot. I can then add options to this, rename it at any point in time for the paint color that I wanted, and it will just basically track that bill and expense, even though I don't necessarily have items in there. If I do have items in my selections, then I can actually really easily add bills and expenses here by just clicking on add item in the bottom and adding that bill or expense. Or when I'm creating my bill and expense from the budget tab or from the bills and expenses tab, I can then really easily go and choose to add it to that specific selection item. So if I go to add a bill, I go to the budget item, I type in Windows, it will allow me to choose what selection item I want to add that bill or expense to. Whereas if there is none, it will basically create an item for you so that it basically starts it off and that you don't have to go back through and try to do that again. On the bills and expenses tab, you're always going to see a total right here. So this is the total of all of the bills and expenses, regardless of if they're paid or unpaid. And then additionally, in the top right corner, you're going to have a client visibility. Bills and expenses are a cost of the project. And so different pros want to show different things to their clients. If you're on a cost plus model, more than likely what's going to happen is you are going to need to show bills and expenses to your client at any point in time. So we've made it really easy in the client visibility settings to give you that option. So as long as bills and expenses are checked, then you'll definitely see that on the client side. If these are unchecked, then the client won't see any of the bills and expenses. And when they click on their budget, they won't see any cost at all. So they won't see any cost in the summary and they won't see any cost in the budget. So again, if you're on a fixed fee kind of budget practice, then you definitely don't have to share bills and expenses. But most of our pros who use that cost plus model do have to share those costs with their clients. And so we've made that really easy for you to do here. Lastly, I'm going to show you really quickly about our global bills and expenses. So to get there, you just click on the More menu, click on Bills and Expenses, and this is going to show you every single bill or expense that you have based on the project. So every single bill and expense that you have ever added, including whether they're associated or not, can be added here or can be seen here for every single project. Bills and expenses, they do have to have a project. You're not able to just add in a random bill or expense without that project. But one of the nice things in here is if you have a bill or expense that you need to split across projects, you can do that within this particular tab. You're not able to do it within the project bills and expenses because when you're in that tab, we're associating that bill or expense to that specific project. But you can do this here in the global bills and expenses. So let's say I went to, RK Mechanical, and I have my plumbing. They're doing plumbing on a job for me for a couple of different jobs. I can put in my information here. I can decide which project I want to add it to. And then let's say I need to add it to my additional project. I can continue to click on project as many times as I want to keep adding bills and expenses to all of my projects. And this will basically split that across the different projects. So what you'll notice is you'll see the items B and E, where I can really quickly go in and add budget line items to that particular project, or I can leave the bill or expense unassociated. And then you'll also see the black home remodel, which is the next project. And again, I have the exact same capabilities here. I'm able to really quickly associate this item to either anything on that particular project budget or just unassociate the item. And then of course, I'm always able to save. If you ever make a mistake here, so for example, maybe I don't need any of these budget items, I can just click on the trash can right next to the name or the cost. And then additionally, if I ever need to delete a bill or expense because it's just not anything that actually applies to my project, or it was, an incoming bill that I thought I was going to have to pay, but now I don't have to pay it. All I have to do is click on this ellipsis menu in the top right corner of any bill and expense anywhere across BuildBook and click on delete, and it will delete that from the system for me. Finally, one last thing I want to really quickly go over is project permissions for bills and expenses. So anybody who is a team admin or above can see the more menu and can see bills and expenses right here. And as long as they have access to the project, they'll be able to click on the link for that particular bill or expense. We still want you to have control of the information that people are seeing. So again, you can definitely have your team admins come in here and add bills and expenses to their projects or split them across projects if you want to, including the team owners. But if they don't have access to that particular project, they won't be able to click on the bill or expense in any type of way to have it pull up that type of information. It will just show up here in this particular venue for them to see where this particular cost is going. And lastly, as far as bills and expenses go, within the global bills and expenses, you are able to filter by projects at any point in time, and you can also search for your bills and expenses by vendor. We don't currently have a way to take refunds for bills and expenses or returns. So for example, if I go to Lowe's, I pick up something for my Benson bathroom remodel and I don't use it all and I can return some of it, that's awesome. But unfortunately, within BuildBook, I'm not able to really record that anywhere. So in that case, what we suggest is clicking on that particular bill or expense. And then within this particular bill or expense, you can then upload your new receipt. So you can upload your receipt with the return receipt if you wanted to. And then here in the particular description, I would put that part of this order was returned and then adjust the cost here to reflect the actual correct amount that you spent on the project. It's definitely not the easiest way to track those returns, but this is how we definitely have it within BuildBook so that you can add the actual correct cost to that particular project or bill or expense. So to recap, you have two different ways to add bills or expenses. You can add them through the projects via the project financials and bills and expenses, or you can add them through the More menu via the bills and expenses there. And this will show you bills and expenses across all projects. If you do get stuck on anything and you need help, feel free to click on this question mark help icon in the top right corner of BuildBook and select chat with us to jump into our real-time chat. Happy building!